guards laughed. They always laughed when prisoners were dragged through the rusted iron gates of the camp, their boots crunching against gravel that reeked of oil, blood, and defeat. To them, every new arrival was just another broken soldier, another trophy of war, another spirit to shatter. But when they shoved Captain Elena Viper Delocqua inside, they weren't imprisoning a victim. They were locking a storm inside their own fortress. The laughter that echoed that night would be the last sound of arrogance those men would ever make. Because 3 days later the storm would break loose, thundering on stolen rotor blades painted in fire and tearing through the very camp they had thought was her grave. Captain Elena Delocqua was 32 years old, but her face bore the lines of someone who had lived lifetimes in combat. Her steel-gray eyes were not merely watchful, they were calculating, relentless, the kind of eyes that had seen chaos and survived it. Beneath her helmet, her dark brown hair was always braided tight in regulation style, but even without the uniform, Elena's posture betrayed her. A soldier to the bone, a warrior who belonged in the sky. To her captors, she was just another American pilot. They saw only a woman, tired, wounded, her flight suit stained with dust and blood. They imagined her breaking under the weight of interrogation, spilling secrets about bases, aircraft, and tactical operations. They had no idea who they were dealing with, and that ignorance would cost them everything. Elena's journey into the cockpit hadn't begun on a battlefield. It began in the swamps of Louisiana. Her father, a retired Army aviator, had been her first instructor, teaching her that flying helicopters wasn't just about mechanical skill. It was about thinking in 3 dimensions. Anyone can fly up, down, left, right, he had told her. But combat is about more than controls. It's about instinct. You've got to outthink your enemy in the sky like a chess master at 200 miles per hour. By the time she joined the Army, Elena had already developed an unusual blend of discipline and creativity. Her instructors noticed it during advanced combat training. While other pilots followed procedure, she bent them just enough to solve problems in ways no one else considered. Under stress, while bullets and alarms screamed through simulations, Elena remained eerily calm. Her solutions weren't always in the handbook, but they worked. And they worked brilliantly. Her call sign, Viper, wasn't a nickname given lightly. It was earned on her 3rd deployment in Afghanistan. An operation had gone bad. American prisoners trapped inside a fortified enemy compound. Elena had been ordered to provide covering fire, but circumstances changed fast. With seconds to decide, she broke formation and attacked alone, flying her Apache through a gauntlet of machine gun fire and RPGs. What followed became the stuff of legend, a precision strike that shattered the compound's defenses and freed the captives. Enemy survivors later described her Apache as a snake striking from the clouds. Silent until it was too late, venomous, deadly, gone in an instant. From that day, she wasn't just Elena. She was Viper. 7 years of combat deployments followed, 342 missions in the most hostile environments on Earth. Deserts riddled with missiles. Jungles thick with ambush. Cities where every rooftop was a potential death trap. Elena survived them all. She didn't just survive, she thrived. Her combat record became a blueprint studied by other pilots. Her innovations in low-level flying and weapons delivery were written into Army manuals. Her Apache never went down under her command, not once, until the day everything changed. It had been a routine reconnaissance mission, at least on paper. Intelligence suggested enemy supply lines running through the mountains. Elena and her co-pilot, Lieutenant Marcus Johnson, were tasked to verify. But the intelligence was wrong, or worse, it had been compromised. The ambush came fast. Surface-to-air missiles streaked up from concealed positions, painting the night sky with fire. Elena's fingers flew across controls, deploying flares, maneuvering the Apache into terrain masking, every ounce of skill keeping them alive for seconds longer. But the missiles kept coming. A direct hit tore through their main rotor system. The aircraft shuddered, screaming in mechanical agony. Another missile detonated close, ripping into the cockpit. Shrapnel tore into Elena's side. Johnson's voice cut off mid-command, silenced forever. She was alone. Through smoke, blood, and chaos, Elena fought for control. Training took over. Autoration, timing, precision. Somehow, impossibly, she coaxed the dying Apache down into a crash landing. The helicopter groaned, twisted, and settled into a clearing, but she was already surrounded. Enemy soldiers moved in with weapons ready. She tried to reach her sidearm, but her hands were slick with blood. Her body was failing her. Her strength, however, refused to give. Even wounded, even outnumbered, she glared at her captors with the same unflinching steel she carried in the sky. And they laughed. The prison camp was a monument to despair. Hidden in the jagged mountains ringed with barbed wire and watchtowers, it had been designed to erase hope. The commander, Dmitry Vulov, was a man who believed no spirit was unbreakable. For 15 years, he had perfected the art of psychological warfare. His methods weren't just about pain. They were about dismantling identity, peeling away layers of resistance until nothing was left. Soldiers who entered his compound emerged as shells, broken and willing to trade secrets for relief. When Elena was dragged into his office, Vulov barely looked up. "Another pilot," he muttered. "She will talk. They all talk." But Elena had been trained for this moment. Survival, evasion, resistance, escape. SEER training wasn't academic. It was ingrained into her very bones. When Vulov demanded information, she gave him nothing more than her name, rank, and serial number. The old rules of war. The unbreakable code. But even as she resisted, her eyes scanned everything. Guard rotations, security patterns, weaknesses in the compound's power grid. Every humiliation, every beating, every moment locked in her cell. She was learning, adapting, preparing, because Elena Viper Delocqua had never been the kind of soldier to wait for rescue. She was the kind of soldier who turned captivity into strategy. And she was already planning the unthinkable. For 3 days, Elena endured captivity. The guards mocked her, shoved her, treated her like an animal. They thought her silence was weakness, a stubborn refusal that would eventually crack. What they couldn't see was that silence was her weapon. Every moment she spoke less, she observed more. Every insult and blow sharpened her focus. The camp was a chessboard, and Elena was already planning her checkmate. She noticed the towers first, 4 of them arranged around the perimeter. Each was manned by 2 guards, but their rotations overlapped poorly. There were blind spots, moments when only 1 guard covered 2 towers. At night, fatigue dulled their vigilance. Elena memorized every second of these lapses. She noted the power grid next. The prison relied on a small diesel generator that hummed in the far corner of the camp. Its cables were vulnerable, exposed in places where rain had eaten away protective casings. One well-placed strike could throw the compound into darkness. Even food delivery told her something. Supplies arrived in a beat-up truck every 3rd day. The guards grew lazy after unloading, smoking, and joking instead of paying attention. Patterns, always patterns, and Elena thrived on patterns. Her fellow prisoners noticed her too. Most were Americans, pilots, special forces, and a handful of intelligence officers, but their spirits had worn thin. Among them was Sergeant First Class Kevin Thompson, a Green Beret with a reputation for unshakable resolve. He had been there for weeks, organizing, waiting, preparing his men to attempt an escape through the forest. His plan was solid, but not against helicopters, thermal imaging, and dogs. On foot, their chances were slim. When Thompson whispered his plan to Elena, she shook her head. "Sergeant, you're thinking like an infantryman," she murmured. "And you're not?" he shot back, his voice low. "I'm a pilot," Elena said, her steel eyes narrowing. "And we're not walking out of here, we're flying." At first, Thompson thought she was delirious. Steal an enemy helicopter? It sounded insane. But then Elena began listing everything she had observed. Patrol schedules, flight patterns, refueling stops. Her engineering-trained mind had already dissected the enemy aircraft from a distance. "They're flying Me-24 Hinds," she explained. "Old designs, different layout than an Apache, sure, but the principles are the same. If I can get my hands on one, I can fly it." The idea was madness. It was also genius, and in war, sometimes madness was the only path to survival. On the fourth night, the plan was set. The guards laughed as usual, unaware that their mockery would be cut short. 12 prisoners, malnourished but determined, waited for the shift change. The eastern perimeter would be their feint, the noise to draw attention. The real objective lay beyond, the refueling pad where an enemy helicopter always landed at dusk. The breakout began in chaos. Elena and Thompson led the charge, surprising guards during their moment of complacency. A stolen rifle barked, a knife flashed. Within seconds, alarms wailed across the camp. Spotlights lit up the compound, sweeping wildly. Just as Elena predicted, the guards assumed it was a typical escape. They rushed east, radios crackling orders. "All prisoners moving through eastern perimeter, deploy helicopters." Exactly as planned. Elena felt her pulse quicken as she heard it, the deep, distinctive roar of rotor blades approaching. The Me-24 Hind descended into the clearing near the camp, its crew expecting to coordinate the hunt. They had no idea the hunt had turned. The ambush was swift. Thompson's men erupted from the shadows as the helicopter touched down. The crew never had a chance. Elena sprinted to the cockpit, her hands moving instinctively over unfamiliar controls. Different symbols, different switches, but the language of flight was universal. "Thompson, get everyone in," she barked. Her voice carried command, unshaken by the insanity of the moment. The helicopter's engines whined louder as Elena coaxed the systems to life. Her mind translated Russian labels into muscle memory. Collective, cyclic pedals, these were constants, no matter the design. "Viper," Thompson called, breathless as prisoners scrambled aboard. "Are you sure you can fly this thing?" Elena didn't look back. "I don't have to be sure, I just have to do it." She pulled the collective. The Hind lurched, heavy but obedient. Its nose lifted, the ground fell away beneath them. The guards below screamed and opened fire, bullets sparking against the fuselage. Too late, the storm had risen. But Elena wasn't done. She could have flown straight to safety, dodging radar, hugging the mountains. But as the prison camp shrank below her, she tightened her grip on the controls. "Thompson," she said through gritted teeth, "we're not leaving this place standing." The prisoners stared at her, stunned. "You're gonna attack them? With their own bird?" Thompson asked. "Yes," Elena replied coldly. "They wanted to cage a pilot, now they'll pay for it." The Hind's weapon systems were crude compared to her Apache, but firepower was firepower. She unleashed it with surgical precision. Rockets streaked into guard towers, shredding them in bursts of flame. Gunfire raked the walls, tearing down the perimeter. The camp that had been designed to break Americans was itself breaking, collapsing under the wrath of the very woman it had tried to contain. Vulov's voice crackled over the radio, panicked. "This is impossible. Our own helicopter is attacking us. How are escaped prisoners flying our aircraft?" Elena pressed the comms. Her voice was ice. "This is Captain Elena Delocqua, United States Army. You captured a pilot, and that was your last mistake." The battle was over in minutes. What remained of the camp smoldered, its defenses reduced to twisted wreckage. The guards who survived scattered, their morale shattered by the sight of their own helicopter turned against them. Elena didn't linger. With her passengers secured, she angled the Hind toward the mountains. Now came the hardest part, the long, dangerous flight home. The prisoners cheered, some in disbelief, others in awe, but Elena stayed silent, her mind locked on the task. She was flying an enemy machine deep in hostile skies. One mistake, one radar lock, one SAM site, and all of them would die. But failure wasn't an option. She hadn't survived 7 years in the cockpit to falter now. As the Hind roared into the night, Elena knew one truth burned brighter than the fires below. She was Viper. And she had just proven that even in captivity, a warrior is never truly disarmed. The night sky stretched above them, vast and starless, as the Hind surged over the jagged ridgelines. The engines roared, echoing through the valleys, a metallic beast straining under Elena's command. Her hands moved across the unfamiliar controls with a surgeon's precision, adapting instinctively, turning alien symbols into second nature. Behind her, 13 freed prisoners clung to hope as tightly as they clung to their seats. Silence filled the cabin, broken only by the whir of rotors and the occasional clipped order from Elena. Hold steady. Stay low. Eyes sharp. Every mile carried risk. Enemy radar, surface-to-air missile sites, roving patrols. The Hind was a trophy, but it was also a target. Elena knew that the moment the enemy realized what had happened, the hunt would begin. Thompson leaned forward, bracing himself against the vibrating fuselage. How far to friendly territory? He asked. Too far, Elena replied without looking back. Her eyes scanned the terrain, memorizing every shadow, every ridge. We're threading a needle in the dark, but I've flown in worse. Her words carried steel, but inside she measured every variable. Fuel reserves, altitude. The wounded prisoner in the back whose breathing grew shallow. The storm wasn't over. It was just beginning. Hours earlier in the camp, Commander Vulov had watched his fortress burn. Now he stood in the wreckage, rage boiling beneath his calm exterior. His men whispered of curses, of traitors, of ghosts. But Vulov knew better. This was no ghost. This was a soldier. She turned our own machine against us, he muttered, grinding his teeth. To him it wasn't just defeat. It was humiliation. And humiliation demanded retribution. He barked orders into his radio. All patrols, all aircraft. Search every grid between here and the border. They cannot escape. Do you understand me? They will not escape. Elena's instincts told her Vulov was already moving pieces against her. She flew low, skimming treetops, using the terrain to mask their profile. The Hind was heavier than her Apache, slower to respond, but it carried a ferocity all its own. She adjusted to its quirks, molding it into an extension of her will. Thompson watched her in silence for a moment before speaking again. Why didn't you just fly us out? Straight to safety? Elena's jaw tightened. Because if we left that camp standing, they'd just fill it with more prisoners. Men and women like us. I wasn't going to leave that behind. For the first time since his capture, Thompson allowed himself a grim smile. You're crazier than I thought. Crazier keeps us alive, Elena replied. They weren't alone in the skies for long. An hour into their flight, the radio crackled with enemy chatter. Elena recognized the language instantly. Search grids were already being deployed. Contact ahead, she muttered. Her trained ears picked up the distant thump of another helicopter. Everyone, hold on. A spotlight pierced the darkness, sweeping across the forest canopy. Enemy patrol. Elena banked hard, pressing the Hind into the Earth's contours, weaving through valleys to stay out of sight. Bullets traced the sky behind them, wild and blind. She cut the throttle, letting gravity pull them into a dive, then pulled up just in time to vanish beneath the radar horizon. Gasps erupted from the prisoners, but Elena remained focused, calm, her breathing steady. Still alive, she whispered to herself, still ahead of them. The chase intensified as dawn approached. Fuel gauges dipped lower. Elena knew they needed to reach friendly lines soon, or not at all. She studied her maps, cross-referencing terrain features with her memory of the region. Mountains, rivers, villages that might house either friends or foes. Every decision mattered. At one point, she spotted a small clearing and considered landing to conserve fuel. But the risk of being cornered on the ground was greater. She pushed on. In the back, the wounded soldier groaned. Thompson knelt beside him, checking his pulse. "He's not going to last much longer without real medics," Thompson warned. "Then we get him real medics," Elena replied. Her voice carried no doubt. The enemy wasn't idle. Vulov's forces coordinated with radar stations closing the noose. By mid-morning, 2 hostile helicopters were on their trail. Their shadows grew on the horizon, closing fast. "Hold tight," Elena barked. She yanked the Hind into a climb, then dove again, pulling maneuvers the designers of this machine had never intended. The frame rattled, but it held. She pushed it to its limits, using every lesson from years in an Apache. Tracer fire streaked past. One round clipped the tail, sending vibrations through the cabin. Elena gritted her teeth, countered with pedal input, and stabilized. "They want a fight?" she muttered. "Let's give them one." She armed the Hind's weapons. Rockets hissed into the air, catching one pursuer in its blast. The enemy bird spiraled out of control, disappearing into the trees in a ball of fire. The second pulled back, wary now of the pilot who fought like a ghost in their own machine. When the border finally appeared on the horizon, a faint line of hills and radio towers. Relief swept through the cabin. Thompson gripped Elena's shoulder. "We made it." Elena shook her head. "Not yet." She radioed ahead. Her voice was steady, professional, even after everything. "Friendly forces, this is Captain Elena Delocqua, United States Army. I am flying a captured Hind with 13 rescued prisoners on board. Request immediate clearance and safe passage." Static, then a stunned response. "Captain, confirm, you're in enemy aircraft?" "Confirmed. I repeat, I am piloting enemy helicopter with American personnel aboard. Prepare for visual ID." The disbelief in the controller's tone was clear. "Roger. Stand by. You are cleared to approach. God help you, Captain." When the Hind touched down at the forward base, soldiers rushed forward, weapons raised until they saw the familiar uniforms inside. Cheers erupted as the prisoners staggered out, weak but alive. Medics swarmed the wounded. Thompson clasped Elena's hand, his eyes burning with gratitude. "You didn't just save us," he said. "You turned the war on its head." Elena allowed herself a thin smile. "I told you. We weren't walking out of there." The forward base erupted in disbelief at what had just landed on its tarmac. Soldiers who had first pointed rifles at the approaching Hind now surged forward, stunned into cheers when they saw American uniforms spill from its cargo hold. The wounded were carried off by medics. Men embraced their brothers in arms, and yet all eyes kept returning to the pilot stepping down from the captured machine. Captain Elena Viper Delocqua. Blood still streaked her flight suit, her braid hung loose from combat and chaos, but her posture was unbroken. She looked less like a survivor and more like a commander returning from a mission she had chosen, not endured. "Captain," an officer began, struggling to find words. "I don't know how you—" "Fuel her up, get the intel off the radios, and log the damage report." Elena cut him off with the sharp calm of a professional. "The story can wait. The mission can't." Even in victory, her mind moved like a pilot in combat, always forward, always tactical. The prisoners she had freed spoke of her in reverent tones. In mess halls, they called her the Ghost, the Storm, a pilot who turned captivity into a weapon. But Elena dismissed titles. She carried the weight of Marcus Johnson, her co-pilot who hadn't made it home, and the faces of the soldiers who would never again leave Vulov's camp. The media, of course, didn't see that. They saw the legend. The woman who hijacked an enemy bird and burned a prison to the ground with their own rockets. Headlines shouted her name. Soldiers swapped the story like a prayer, proof that even in the darkest cage, a warrior could still strike. Back in enemy territory, Vulov's fortress was nothing but twisted steel and ash. He stood amid the ruins, his hands clenched behind his back, his reputation in shreds. His men whispered that Delocqua was a phantom, a curse, a punishment from the skies. Vulov knew better. She was simply a soldier who refused to break. And that knowledge haunted him more than superstition. He had built his career on the certainty that all prisoners cracked eventually. Elena had not only refused, she had used his own machine to annihilate his work. For the first time in 15 years, Commander Vulov was no longer feared. He was pitied. 6 months later, Elena stood on a stage at Fort Rucker, Alabama, in a pressed uniform, steel-gray eyes staring straight ahead. The Distinguished Service Cross gleamed at her chest, pinned there by a general whose voice thundered through the speakers. "For extraordinary heroism and unbreakable spirit," he declared, "Captain Elena Delocqua has not only returned 13 Americans home, she has altered the course of this war." The crowd roared. Cameras flashed. But Elena's mind wasn't on the applause. It was back in the mountains, in the cockpit of a dying Apache, in the shadows of Vulov's compound, in the roar of the Hind lifting from captivity into freedom. Medals could never outweigh memory. After the ceremony, Sergeant Kevin Thompson found her. He wore fresh scars, but carried himself with the same unshakable resolve. "You didn't just save us," he said. "You made them fear us again. You reminded them who we are." Elena allowed herself a small, tired smile. "Good. Let them remember fear is a weapon, too." The war shifted after that. Intelligence reports revealed enemy commanders now hesitated to capture American pilots. Where once they saw them as valuable intelligence assets, they now saw them as potential disasters waiting to happen. Elena had rewritten the psychology of war, not through doctrine, not through orders, but through action. Her name became shorthand in military academies. In SEER training, instructors told her story as proof that captivity did not mean defeat. Cadets whispered her call sign like a challenge. "Think like Viper." Years later, Elena rose to lieutenant colonel. She no longer flew Apaches into combat, but she forged the next generation of aviators. In classrooms and training grounds, she stood tall before wide-eyed cadets. "The enemy will underestimate you," she told them. "They'll believe they've broken you. That's when you strike. Your cage is not your cage, it's your battlefield. If they give you nothing but dirt and iron, then you use dirt and iron. If they give you a helicopter, you take it. You turn every disadvantage into their nightmare." The cadets scribbled every word, but more than the words, they absorbed her presence. Calm, relentless. A storm that had once broken chains and would never truly be at rest. Vulov's name vanished from reports. His camp was never rebuilt. His doctrine collapsed under the shadow of Elena's escape. Some said he was exiled, muttering in shame. Others claimed he drank himself into obscurity. None of it mattered. Elena never thought of him again. Her war had never been about one man. It had been about proving that no chain could define her or any soldier who followed. In quiet moments, she still heard the echoes, the guards' laughter, the hymns' roar, Vulov's voice trembling over the radio. Not as nightmares, as reminders. That survival is not endurance, it is defiance. Her final lesson to every new class of pilots was always the same. Never let them decide who you are. Not your enemies, not your captors, not even your commanders. You are more dangerous than they can ever imagine. If they laugh at you, let them. Because when you rise, they won't be laughing anymore. And in those words lived the storm that once tore through a prison camp, rewriting the very rules of war. Because Elena Viper Delocqua had proven one truth for all time. The most dangerous place for your enemies is believing they have you exactly where they want you.